The weak cling to ideals. The powerful shape them. This is not a lecture on morality. It is a blueprint for bending human nature to your design. If you cannot engineer the social order, it will engineer you. And it has no pity for the unprepared. In every court, every marketplace, every whispered conversation, there exists a hidden scaffolding, an architecture of influence invisible to the untrained eye. Most live within it as tenants, paying rent in obedience and silence. But a rare few, they are the architects. They lay the foundations of belief, draft the laws of perception, and design the currents that sweep the crowd to their chosen shore. This is no game of chance. It is the deliberate shaping of human impulse. What you call persuasion, I call governance. What you call manipulation, I call design. And in this design, sentiment is a liability, hesitation a death sentence. If you would ascend above the governed, you must strip the illusion from the world and learn to see society not as it claims to be, but as it truly is, a structure of levers, pulleys and concealed gears, each waiting for the hand bold enough to turn them. Before a single law is written, before a ruler speaks, the battle is already won or lost. Why? Because perception is the first battlefield, and only a fool marches into it unarmed. You imagine the world as solid, fixed, governed by truth. But truth is a poor king, easily dethroned by the skilled artisan of illusion. Men do not act upon reality. They act upon what they believe reality to be. The wise know this. The powerful exploit it. The rest live and die in someone else's dream. Consider the Roman Senate in the days before Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The senators thought themselves defenders of the Republic, but their sense of duty was not born of independent judgment. It was cultivated. Whispers of tyranny, carefully placed in the right ears, turned patriotism into a weapon. By the time truth arrived, perception had already decided the verdict. Understand this: control the frame, and you control the fight before it begins. A man entering a room where you have already defined him will wear the costume you hand him. Label him visionary, and even his errors seem daring. Call him traitor, and even his virtues reek of deceit. Do you think this is only politics? No, it is every negotiation, every courtship, every rivalry. The merchant who prices his wares at triple their worth, but generously offers you a discount, is not selling cloth. He is selling perception. The general who marches an army in broad daylight past the same valley twice is not showing strength. He is manufacturing the belief that his forces are endless. You have been shaped by such designs since birth. The music you trust, the leaders you admire, the enemies you fear, all were placed before you in a frame someone else built. And like most, you mistook the frame for the world itself. The blueprint of perception begins long before contact. It is laid quietly, invisibly, so when the moment arrives, the target's conclusions feel self-born. This is the purest form of control, not forcing obedience, but making obedience feel inevitable. Look to the Medici of Florence. They seldom declared their power outright. They wrapped it in patronage, in the grandeur of art and architecture. The cathedral dome was not just stone, it was a story, whispering that Florence itself rose because of Medici vision. To oppose them was not rebellion, it was blasphemy against the city's destiny. This is the genius of perception engineering. You make the symbol inseparable from the source. The king becomes the nation. The church becomes morality. The merchant becomes prosperity itself. Do you see the trap? Once perception fuses with identity, to attack the architect is to attack the believer. And men will defend their beliefs to the death, even when those beliefs serve someone else's gain. So how does one draft this blueprint? First, define the narrative before your rivals can speak. The earliest voice often becomes the truest in the minds of the many, regardless of accuracy. Second, anchor your image to something larger than yourself, an idea, a value, a cause that others cannot easily oppose. Third, seed symbols into every interaction. Symbols bypass reason. They speak to the ancient part of the mind where loyalty is forged without thought. Psychology tells us that the human mind does not store facts, it stores stories. Facts are sharp, but brittle. Stories are soft, yet they endure. Wrap your agenda in a story, and it will spread itself like fire in dry grass. The mistake of the unskilled manipulator is to think persuasion happens in the moment of argument. No. By the time you are arguing, you have already lost. Persuasion is prepared in the silence before the conversation begins. Ask yourself, what do they already believe about me before I enter the room? If you cannot answer, you are not the architect here. You are merely a tenant in someone else's design. The wise ruler, or the cunning operator, never leaves perception to chance. They know that first impressions are not formed in the first meeting, but in the stories others have already heard. And they ensure those stories are the ones they have authored. History remembers victors not merely for their deeds, but for the way those deeds are told. Alexander is called the Great, not because every conquest was just, but because his chroniclers made them appear inevitable. Would you remember him so if his enemies had written the tale? If you cannot master the blueprint of perception, you will always be building on someone else's foundation, and their foundation will determine the shape of your fate. Remember, the strongest fortress is not built of stone, but of belief. Once a mind accepts your frame, every fact that enters it will bend to fit your design. And in that moment, the game is no longer about winning. It is about maintaining the illusion that you never could have lost. Now, if perception is the battlefield, then consensus is the weapon. And in the next step, we will see how a single will can be disguised as the will of the many. The crowd is a dangerous creature, chaotic, emotional, unpredictable. But in the right hands, it can be sculpted into a single, obedient mind. And here is the truth most cannot bear. The majority rarely decides anything. It is decided for them, and they are made to believe it was their idea all along. This is the essence of manufacturing consensus. The clever ruler does not command the multitude outright. He plants an idea like a seed and lets the people water it with their own voices. By the time it blooms, they will defend it as fiercely as if they had birthed it themselves. Consider the Venetian Republic. When its leaders wished to expand naval power, they did not declare it from the Doge's throne. Instead, they spread whispers of foreign fleets amassing beyond the horizon. Merchants began to murmur of unsafe trade routes. Sailors told tales of near encounters. By the time the Doge addressed the Senate, the call for a stronger navy was already an echo of the people's own fears. This is the first principle. You do not push the crowd, you let them push themselves in the direction you have chosen. Psychologists call it social proof. When enough voices repeat a belief, the human mind begins to confuse repetition with truth. Few dare to stand against what they believe everyone agrees upon. Even fewer will admit they are the only dissenter in the room. Do you see the elegance of this? One seed, planted in the right soil, can grow into a forest of agreement, and the forest will shade out every rival idea. But the seed must be chosen with precision. It must appeal not only to reason, but to fear, pride, and self-interest. You must give people a story in which supporting your aim makes them virtuous, loyal, even heroic. Opposition must feel dangerous, shameful, or absurd. The French Revolution offers a sharp lesson. The rallying cry of liberté, égalité, fraternité, was not born spontaneously in every street. It was sharpened, repeated, painted on walls, carried in songs. Soon it was not just a phrase. It was the air one breathed in Paris. To oppose it was to declare oneself an enemy of the people. Consensus had been manufactured, and it gave birth to a movement unstoppable until it consumed its own creators. Here lies the second principle. Once consensus forms, it becomes self-policing. You no longer need to silence dissent. The crowd will do it for you. The fear of isolation is more powerful than the threat of punishment. You may think this requires armies of supporters. It does not. A small, disciplined faction can simulate the voice of the majority if it speaks with unity and repetition. This is the tyranny of appearances. People believe what they think most people believe, even if those most people are a carefully staged illusion. In the age of the printing press, this meant flooding pamphlets and speeches into the public square. In our age, it means controlling the channels where information flows fastest and widest. The medium changes, but the principle is eternal. Whoever commands the echo chamber commands the crowd. Understand that consensus is not about truth. It is about alignment. The human animal is tribal. Belonging is a survival instinct. If you can make your idea the ticket into the tribe, men will march toward it without needing to know the path. But beware, consensus is a fire. It can warm you or burn you alive. If it grows too wild, the crowd may turn on the very hand that fed it. History is full of rulers who were overthrown by revolutions they themselves ignited. So you must build your consensus as an architect builds a bridge, strong, but with channels to release pressure when the current grows too strong. Let the people believe they are free to disagree in small, irrelevant ways. Offer them safe outlets for their discontent so it never focuses on you. And always remain the invisible conductor. The music must sound like it is coming from the orchestra, never from your baton. If they see your hand too clearly, the spell breaks. When done well, manufacturing consensus creates a strange magic. Your enemies find themselves defending your position, believing it to be theirs. Your rivals speak your language, fight on your terms, march to your tempo. And then, the most dangerous moment arrives. When you have turned many voices into one, the temptation is to believe the chorus will always sing your song. But the crowd is fickle, and the next shift in the wind can carry them away. So the question becomes, how do you bind them so tightly to your design that even apparent freedom leads them exactly where you want? That is the domain of the next principle, the illusion of choice. The most dangerous lie is the one that feels like freedom. Men will rebel against chains they can see. But give them invisible chains, forged from their own choices, and they will defend them as rights. This is the art of the illusion of choice. The ruler who understands it does not need to forbid the people from acting. He simply ensures that every path they take leads to his desired destination. Consider the ancient Roman Republic. Elections were held, citizens voted. But the candidates were almost always drawn from the same noble families, their loyalty already secured. It did not matter who won. The patrician order remained unshaken. The people felt powerful. The Senate stayed in control. The illusion of choice pacifies rebellion. When men believe they have selected their fate, they swallow it whole, even if it poisons them. Do you think this is only politics? Look closer. The merchant offers you 3 versions of the same product: basic, premium, exclusive. You believe you have chosen based on preference. But each option was designed to lead you to the one he wanted you to take from the beginning. The commander lets his restless generals argue over 2 strategies, one risky, one cautious. Both are flawed by design, leading them to the compromise he desired all along. When they leave the war table, they praise their collective wisdom, never realizing the decision was made before the debate began. The psychology is simple. People fear restriction but crave agency. If you give them no options, they resent you. If you give them too many, they drown in indecision. But if you offer 2 or 3 carefully crafted choices, you create the sweet illusion that they steer their own destiny. The key lies in framing. Control the options, and you control the outcome. You do not need to dictate their thinking, only the boundaries within which they think. Look to the church in medieval Europe. Salvation was the universal goal, and the church presented two paths: obedience to its laws or eternal damnation. Was there truly a choice? Yes, between compliance and annihilation. But to the believer, it felt like a free decision made of his own will. When you design the illusion of choice, you also create loyalty. Men defend the choices they believe they made themselves. They will even resist evidence that they were guided, for to admit the truth would be to admit weakness. And here lies its most exquisite use, when two factions oppose each other, but both are operating within the field you have drawn, you win no matter who prevails. The British Empire mastered this in its colonies. When rival local leaders clashed over trade rights, the empire acted as mediator, ensuring that whichever side prevailed, the economic structure still served London's interests. It did not need to crush dissent. It simply built a cage so vast that rebellion never left its walls. But beware. This is not about deception alone. An illusion of choice must feel authentic. If the options are too obviously rigged, you invite suspicion. If they are too equally appealing, you invite paralysis. You must create a hierarchy of desirability. One option should be too poor to tempt them, another too extreme, and the one you want them to choose. It must appear balanced, reasonable, even selfless. It must seem like the only sensible conclusion reached entirely by their own mind. Psychologists call this choice architecture. A ruler calls it survival, because when people are busy debating which path to take, they rarely notice who built the road. But there is a more dangerous use. You can make men think they have rejected you while still binding them to your plan. Offer them an option so extreme they turn it down in relief, only to accept your compromise. That was your true aim from the start. This is the tactic of the false retreat. Give ground only to lead them where you wish. Do you begin to see? The illusion of choice is not about controlling decisions in the moment. It is about designing the field so that every decision, past or future, moves them closer to your will. A chess master does not control the opponent's hands. He controls the board until every move leads to the same checkmate. But even the perfect illusion cannot stand if the pieces themselves are too volatile. The human mind is predictable in its limits, but within those limits it can still surprise you. To truly master the game, you must learn how to use those limits against them. And that leads us to the next principle, where weakness becomes the lever and human nature itself the tool. All men proclaim themselves unique, but strip away their pretensions and you will find the same levers hidden in the flesh of their minds. Fear, pride, greed, lust, loyalty. The wise ruler knows these are not flaws. They are tools. The tragedy of human nature is that it repeats itself. The advantage for you is that it repeats itself. The general who studies his enemy's army may win a battle. The one who studies the enemy's nature wins a war. Consider Hannibal at Cannae. He did not overpower the Romans with sheer force. He exploited their arrogance. He knew they could not resist charging into what looked like a weak center. So he gave them that weakness, a calculated retreat, only to close the trap around them. 100,000 soldiers walked into their own destruction, thinking they were victorious. Do you see the lesson? Your opponent's strength can be turned against him if you understand the weakness that underlies it. In courtly politics, this is even easier. The ambitious courtier hungers for recognition. Feed that hunger with flattery, and he will volunteer information without realizing it. The pious man craves moral purity. Suggest that serving your plan fulfills his duty to God, and he will march under your banner believing it his own mission. Psychology gives these weaknesses names: confirmation bias, status seeking, fear of loss. History gives them examples in every era. The fear of loss is perhaps the most reliable. Men will risk much to gain, but they will risk everything to avoid losing what they already possess. If you want compliance, do not promise them rewards. Threaten what they value. The threat need not be explicit, A whisper, a rumor, a silent gesture toward the abyss is often enough. Pride is another golden key. The proud man must maintain his image at all costs. He will reject truth if it humiliates him, and he will embrace lies if they flatter him. A skilled manipulator can make him defend positions that damage him simply by making retreat look like disgrace. Even loyalty can be exploited. The loyal servant often becomes the most useful pawn because his devotion blinds him to the harm you might do. If you make yourself the center of his identity, betrayal will feel like self-destruction, and so he will never turn. You may wonder, is this not cruelty? No, it is recognition. A lion is not cruel for taking the throat of a deer, it is simply using the laws of nature. Man's nature is written in the same ink, but here is where most fail. They try to change human nature instead of bending to it. You cannot make men less fearful, less greedy, less vain. You can only learn where those currents run and place your wheel to harness them. The Venetians mastered this in trade. They knew merchants feared unstable routes, so they quietly spread stories of piracy in rival ports. The traders, seeking safety, flocked to Venetian harbors, paying higher fees for the illusion of protection. Fear was turned into profit without ever drawing a sword. This is the essence. Predictable weakness allows you to design predictable outcomes. The man who loves gold can be led with gold. The man who fears disgrace can be caged by the threat of it. The man who must appear virtuous can be cornered into serving your will in the name of morality. But do not think weakness only resides in others. You, too, have them. If you do not know your own, an enemy will. And once found, they will own you. The cunning ruler keeps his own levers hidden, even from allies. He starves them of information that could reveal his appetites. Better to be thought cold and unreadable than to display the heat of any desire. And when you strike at weakness, strike cleanly. Prolonged exploitation risks awakening suspicion. The moment they glimpse the pattern, they will fight you not as an opponent, but as a deceiver, and the deceiver, once unmasked, cannot regain trust. The perfection of this art is in the subtlety. You do not tell a vain man he is vain. You tell him he is exceptional. You do not warn the fearful of loss. You suggest that safety lies in your protection. You let them believe they are acting for themselves, while every step brings them deeper into your design. Remember, you need not break a man to control him. You only need to learn the string that moves him and pull it at the right time. But there is a final refinement. What if you could remain entirely unseen while still directing the play? What if others believed themselves the authors of your scheme, defending it as their own creation? That, my listener, belongs to the last and most delicate principle, the invisibility of power. Power is most secure when it is unseen. The moment your hand is visible, the game changes. Opposition gathers. Allies watch you with new suspicion, and every move becomes harder to make. The true master of influence walks in daylight as an ordinary man, while his designs move in the shadows. This is the invisibility principle. The visible ruler becomes a target. The invisible ruler becomes a myth. One can be struck. The other only suspected. Look to the Medici of Florence. They ruled not always from the throne, but from the counting house. Bankers, merchants, patrons of art, never crowned kings, yet kings obeyed their credit. Their power was written not in decrees, but in the debts others owed them. Few could point to the exact hand that shaped the city, yet all felt its weight. Invisibility is not absence. It is the deliberate concealment of authorship. You let others wear your crown while you hold the true scepter. Why does this work? Because human nature seeks faces to blame. If the people cannot see you, they cannot unite against you. Instead, they turn on the visible figure, the puppet who believes himself master. Consider the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. He unified the warring states through force, yes, but his legalist ministers shaped policy, engineered reforms, and silenced rivals. They acted in his name, but the true authorship lay behind closed doors. When discontent grew, it struck at the emperor's image, not the architects in the shadows. Do you see the protection this grants? An enemy may defeat your general, overthrow your governor, even topple your monarch. Yet if your hand is unseen, you survive to rebuild. But invisibility is not simply hiding. It is the art of making others appear to be the decision makers. You must feed them enough control to feel ownership, enough praise to believe in their autonomy, and enough rope to bind themselves to your plan. The English crown mastered this with its colonies. Local assemblies debated laws, voted on measures, and proudly proclaimed their governance. All the while, the framework of trade, taxation, and military defense was controlled from London. The colonies believed they ruled themselves, until the day they tested the edges of their cage. Psychology calls this diffusion of responsibility. When multiple actors believe they share power, no one feels entirely in control, and thus no one is fully accountable. This is where you thrive. Invisible influence thrives in confusion. But there is another reason to embrace the shadows. Visibility creates envy. Even loyal allies may grow resentful when they see your hand shaping every outcome. By remaining invisible, you allow them to shine. Their victories are your victories, but their glory shields you from their jealousy. The Ottoman Empire provides a perfect example. The Grand Vizier often carried the burden of ruling, while the Sultan appeared aloof, distant, almost divine. In reality, the Sultan's isolation was deliberate. An invisible net of advisors, spies, and loyalists ensured his will was executed without his direct involvement in every decision. The Vizier received both credit and blame, absorbing the dangers of visibility. So how does one practice invisibility? First, remove the markers of command. Avoid issuing orders directly when they can be delivered through intermediaries. Second, create multiple plausible sources for any decision. Let the trail of influence blur, so even those inside the court cannot agree on who truly shaped it. Third, design outcomes that benefit others more obviously than they benefit you. A gift is never feared, until its hidden cost is revealed too late. And always remember, the more they believe the plan is theirs, the less they will resist executing it. But invisibility demands discipline. You will feel the temptation to step into the light, to claim the credit you deserve. Resist it. The applause of today can become the noose of tomorrow. Ask yourself, would you rather be celebrated and struck down, or doubted and untouchable? The moment your enemies cannot even prove you exist in the game, you have won a kind of immortality. You become not a man, but a force. Not a player, but the board itself. Yet invisibility is not without risk. If you vanish too completely, your influence may fade, your designs may drift without your touch. The art lies in balancing presence and absence. Close enough to adjust the gears, distant enough to remain a ghost. History remembers those who stood on the balcony, waving to the crowd. But it was the unseen hand behind the curtain that decided who stood there in the first place. So now you understand the architecture. Perception, consensus, choice, weakness, invisibility, 5 pillars upon which power can be built to last beyond a lifetime. But what if the structure must not only endure, what if it must expand? Then, my listener, you must learn the final truth. How to turn every victory into the foundation of the next conquest. Power that can be seen can be challenged. Power that is unseen is almost impossible to destroy. The highest form of control is not forcing obedience. It is making obedience feel like freedom. You do not silence voices. You give them words that serve you. You do not close doors. You frame the hallway so all paths lead where you want. You do not fight human nature. You ride it until even rebellion serves your design. This is the architecture of invisible dominance. Those who master it do not win battles. They decide which battles will exist at all. Ask yourself, are you shaping the game? Or are you just another piece on the board? If you hunger for more strategies to command without appearing to, subscribe now. If this sharpened your understanding of power, share it, spread the seed, and tell me in the comments which pillar of control will you master first, your move.